protest, rioting, looting, and racial tension run rampant through our American streets. This is Connor Duff IV coming to you from WSCA News. This special report will address some of the racial relations, rioting, and protesting going on in our country right now. First, we will visit the history books of Wise County, Virginia to look at a story of race relations amongst white and black Christians in the South back in the 1800s.
This story comes from the book Wise County, Virginia by Charles A. Johnson. The event took place on Big Black Mountain in Wise County, Virginia in 1879. Charles Johnson set out on a journey to visit a brother in Letcher County, Kentucky, and needed a place to stay. He happened to stumble upon the farm of Dan Richmond, an ex-slave, and his family. The Richmonds, though colored, took Charles in that night. Charles discovered something incredible that he shared with these people. The custom with country folk was to retire early and to rise early, even in wintertime. And it was not so long until the old gentleman remarked, "It is about our bedtime, and it is our custom to hold family worship before retiring." After a scripture lesson read by the old gentleman, 2 or 3 songs were sung, one of them, "A Charge to Keep I Have," "A God to Glorify," "A Never-Dying Soul to Save," and "Fitted for the Sky," in which the whole family joined, singing the different parts, and such sweet melodious singing I had never heard before. Then followed a prayer by the old man, and such fervent prayer I thought I had never heard before. And then another song, and the service ended. And there, in that humble wilderness mountain home, kneeling at the family altar, with a family whose color was as black as the ace of spades, but whose souls, washed in the blood of the Lamb, had been made as white as snow, I was touched by the wonders and goodness of God and His mercy. Uncle Dan Richmond, though colored, was not only loved and esteemed by his own race, but he was highly respected, an honest, upright citizen and Christian man by the white race. As I plodded my way on down the lonesome mountainside on that memorable winter morning after I'd parted with Uncle Dan and his kind family, refreshed from a good night's rest and the happy thought of being spared to see the dawn of another day, I could not but marvel at God's wonderful creation and His great wisdom, love, goodness, and mercy in providing that through the blood of His crucified Son, that although one man may be black without, he can be made white within, as were the blacks of Black Mountain.
This is Connor Duff IV reporting from USF Martin Luther King Memorial Gardens. In 1963, Martin Luther King had an interview with Mike Wallace from ABC addressing the rioting that was taking place during the summer months of 1963. The riots were taking place because of heavy racial tension and segregation in the South. Here's the interview now.
In my basic idea that nonviolence is the most potent weapon available to the Negro in his struggle for freedom and justice. I think for the Negro to turn to violence would be both impractical and immoral.
There is an increasingly vocal minority who disagree totally with your tactics, Dr. King.
There's no doubt about that. I would agree that there is a group in the Negro community advocating violence now. I happen to feel that this group represents a numerical minority. Surveys have revealed this. The vast majority of Negroes still feel that the best way to deal with the dilemma that we face in this country is through nonviolent resistance. And I don't think this vocal group will be able to make a real dent in the Negro community in terms of swaying 22 million Negroes to this particular point of view. And I contend that the cry of black power is at bottom a reaction to the reluctance of white power to make the kind of changes necessary to make justice a reality for the Negro. I think we've got to see that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the economic plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years.
How many summers like this one do you imagine that we can expect?
Well, I would say this, we don't have long. The mood of the Negro community now is one of urgency, one of saying that we aren't going to wait, that we've got to have our freedom. We've waited too long. So that I would say that every summer we are going to have this kind of vigorous protest. My hope is that it will be nonviolent. I would hope that we can avoid riots because riots are self-defeating and socially destructive. I would hope that we can avoid riots, but that we will be as militant and as determined next summer and through the winter as we have been this summer. And I think the answer about how long it will take will depend on the federal government, on the city halls of our various cities, and on white America to a large extent. This is where we are at this point, and I think white America will determine how long it will be and which way we go in the future.
In this interview, Martin Luther King talked about rioting being the voice of the unheard. People today still feel the same way. This is why we have riots and racial tension. People still feel like they're segregated, racially profiled, and unheard. This is Connor Duff IV, reporting from Ferguson, Missouri. Rioting and looting run rampant through the streets of this small Midwestern town. But the question is, why is this all happening? On this past Monday, November 24th, Ray McCullen, Ferguson's Attorney General, presented the grand jury's decision not to indict Officer Darren Wilson on charges of murder from a high-profile case in August. On August 9th, 18-year-old Michael Brown robbed a liquor store in Ferguson. He was unarmed. Michael Brown was then walking around Ferguson when he met Officer Wilson, who had just received a call about a large black teenager who had just robbed a store. Officer Wilson pulled in front of Michael, and then Michael Brown proceeded to go towards Officer Wilson's car. A fight broke out, and in the end, Michael Brown was shot and killed. This spiked racial tension. This spiked racial tension, rioting and looting in this once peaceful town of Ferguson. Leaders continue to stir the pot that is racial tension and incite riots. Time will only tell if the tiny town of Ferguson can ever get through these troubling days. This is Connor Duff IV, reporting from in studio. In light of recent events taking place in Ferguson, Missouri, protesters have taken to the streets in many of America's biggest cities. Cities such as New York, Boston, Chicago, Denver, and St. Louis have seen a spike in protests. These protesters are more peaceful than the ones in Ferguson, but there are still major problems being caused in tons of our American cities. These protesters are often raising their hands and saying, "Hands up, don't shoot." People also stop traffic along bridges and major highways, which disrupts traffic. In Chicago, protesters sit outside the mayor's office in dead silence, CNN reports. These protests took an even bigger stage when 4 St. Louis Rams football players did the Hands Up, Don't Shoot protest. These protests are taking place all over America. This is Connor Duff IV, reporting from Curtis Hickson Waterfront Park in Tampa. Last night, a group of about 200 protesters peacefully interrupted a Christmas program in this park. The protesters then marched through downtown, disrupting traffic. Then, after about an hour, the protests dissipated. One might think that protesters just jump up and form a group of protesters, but this is not the case. According to a report by NPR's Hashi Lil Wang, protests that are happening around America have been planned for months. Mr. Wang interviewed Jose Lopez, a protest planner, about tactics that he uses in planning protests. Lopez said that he uses social media, late-night calling, and other methods that the original civil rights protesters used, such as door-to-door recruiting and flyers around neighborhoods. Lopez also says that social media is a perfect pipeline to recruiting protesters for this cause. Setting up a protest is now as easy as sending out a text or tweeting, "Meet at so-and-so park at such and such time." This new way of planning a protest is very effective in getting protesters' points across. On this special report, we have looked at several examples of racial tension in America. Also, rioting, looting, and protesting that has been going on in Ferguson and other major American cities. We have also visited the opinion of the greatest civil rights leader ever, Martin Luther King. He believes that rioting is the language of the unheard, but still believes that peace is a better option. Maybe we should heed his words today. This is Connor Duff IV, wishing you a happy holidays and signing off.